The music didn't fade. It stopped, as if someone had sliced the sound cable with a knife. For one heartbeat, the only thing left in the vast Harbor Line Yard pavilion was the soft, collective inhale of thousands of people, and the click-click-click of cameras searching for something to devour. On the runway, under a blade of white light, Aria Wynne stood perfectly still. She wore midnight velvet, so deep it looked almost black until it moved, until it caught the light and returned it like a secret. The gown clung to her waist and fell in clean, deliberate lines, not begging for attention, not apologizing for it either. It wasn't loud. It was inevitable. At the end of the catwalk, an enormous LED screen behind her displayed a single word in serif font. EVA, murmur rose like a tide. Aria did not turn to look at the screen. She didn't need to. As she knew what that symbol did to people. She knew what it did to men who built their lives around being the only one seen. And then, a figure shoved past the security line, a man in a dark suit. Hair imperfect for the first time in his life, face flushed as if he'd been running from something that could finally catch him. Damien Blackthorne. His shoes struck the runway with the wrong sound, heavy, panicked, disrespectful. The crowd reacted the way crowds always do when they smell collapse. Phones lifted higher, mouths opened wider. Damien's eyes locked onto Aria as if he could drag her back into the shadows by force of will alone. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, voice cracked thin with rage and disbelief. "You think you can..." He took another step. Aria could see it, the tremor in his fingers. The stiffness in his jaw like he was holding himself together with a clamp. The sheen of sweat under the stage lights. He looked like a man who'd spent years calling other people unstable, only to discover instability had been living inside his own name. Behind him, security rushed forward. Too late. Damien reached out, hand half-closing around Aria's upper arm. Not even firmly, not violently. Just enough to claim, just enough to remind her of the way he used to steer her through rooms without ever looking at her, guiding her like furniture. Aria didn't flinch. She simply turned her head, slowly, calmly, and looked at the hand on her arm the way one might look at a stain on glass. Then she lifted her eyes to his. In the hush, her voice carried clean and low. "Take your hand off me." Damien's lips curled, cruel and familiar. "Or what, Aria?" You'll what? Change outfits again? Pretend you're someone you're not?" A ripple of laughter, nervous, hungry, moved through the front rows. Aria's gaze didn't move. "You're right," she said. "I am pretending." Damien blinked, thrown off for half a second. "What?" Aria's mouth softened, not into kindness, into clarity. "I've been pretending you were untouchable." That was when the hands reached Damien, not security, not fans. Two men in plain clothes stepped onto the runway as if they had every right to be there, because they did. One of them showed a badge so quickly the cameras barely caught it, but the flash of metal was enough. The letters, though, were crisp. FBI. Damien froze mid-breath, still holding Aria's arm. "Damien Elias Blackthorne?" the agent asked, voice almost bored with how predictable powerful men became at the end. So Damien opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You are under arrest," the agent continued, "for securities fraud and related charges." Damien's face went blank, as if his mind had slammed a door. Then it flooded. Anger, panic, denial, like water breaking through a crack. This is a setup," he barked. "This is her. She's trying to ruin me." The agent's eyes flicked to Arya for a fraction of a second. Arya stared back, unmoved. Damien jerked his head toward her. "Tell him! Tell him! It's a misunderstanding! Arya!" The crowd was filming now the way people filmed storms. Damien's voice rose, sharp enough to cut. "You were nothing without me!" Arya's lashes lowered slightly, a slow blink that felt like a verdict. Then she leaned forward, just enough that only he could truly hear her, though microphones still drank every syllable. "I was nothing," she whispered, "because you kept dressing me as a ghost." Damien's grip tightened in reflex. The agent didn't raise his voice. He simply removed Damien's hand from Arya's arm, like someone peeling away a lie. Metal clicked. Cuffs closed around Damien's wrists. Damien's mouth opened again, but the sound that came out wasn't speech. It was the raw, cracked noise of a man watching his own narrative die. Arya stepped back, not in fear, in reclamation. She faced the audience again, thousands of faces, thousands of hungry eyes, and for the first time, she did not make herself smaller for them. Above her, the screen shifted. The single word EV dissolved into a second line. Eden Vale. A collective gasp rolled across the room like thunder arriving late. Arya's voice cut through it, quiet and certain. "And if you want to know how a man like Damien Blackthorne ended up in handcuffs on my runway..." She paused, letting the silence hold. "You'll have to understand that this story doesn't begin here." A beat. "It begins with a color." And the color was gray. 3 years earlier, Blackthorne House looked like a place designed to erase evidence of living. The walls were white in the way ice was white, clean, cold, unforgiving. The floors were pale stone that swallowed footsteps. Every corner smelled faintly of cedar and expensive disinfectant, like luxury refusing to admit it could ever rot. Arya learned quickly that the house wasn't a home. It was a brand, and Damien Blackthorne treated brands like religions. No deviation, no mess, no humanness. It started small. A suggestion, delivered with that soft, the managerial tone he used when he wanted obedience to feel like care. "You look better in muted tones," Damien said one morning, adjusting the cuff of his shirt in the mirror as if Arya were an accessory reflected beside him. "The cameras, they can be cruel." Arya glanced down at her blouse. Cream, delicate, warm. A little bit of lace at the collar. She had worn it because she missed feeling like herself. Damien's gaze stayed on the mirror. "Gray will suit you." It should have sounded harmless. It should have been nothing. But there was something underneath it. Something hungry. Something that didn't want Arya to be seen. A week later, the closet had changed. Not emptied, not violently, just curated. New hangers appeared, identical and thin, carrying the same shade repeated across fabric. Ash, pearl, smoke, fog. And her colorful dresses still existed, technically. They were moved to a guest closet, out of reach, out of sight. A month later, Damien stood behind Arya as she sat at the vanity. His fingers gathered her hair. "You should wear it up," he said. "It looks more composed." Arya watched her own reflection. The soft waves she used to let fall around her face disappeared as Damien twisted them into a tight bun. A severe knot. A closed door. When he finished, he kissed her forehead like a stamp. "Perfect," he murmured, and then he left without looking back. Arya touched her hair. It hurt a little at the scalp. The first time she asked why, Damien laughed, quietly, as if she'd made a charming mistake. "Arya," he said, "I'm protecting you. You don't understand how this world works. People see a CEO's wife as a statement. They'll dissect you, Ah, they'll make up stories. His hand slid to her shoulder, firm, possessive. This way, you get peace. Peace, Arya realized, was what you called it when the cage had good lighting. And then there was Céline Laurent. The first time Arya saw her in person was at a tech conference, after party, one of those rooms full of glass and laughter that never touched anyone's eyes. Arya arrived 2 steps behind Damien, as instructed, muted gray dress, hair in a strict bun, no jewelry besides her wedding band. Damien didn't hold her hand. He never did in public. He walked like he was alone. And Céline was already there, standing near the bar in a sleek black suit that made her look like a blade. She turned when she sensed Damien, smile bright as flashbulbs. "Damien," Céline said, as if his name belonged in her mouth. She moved closer, too close. Then Damien's face softened, just slightly. The warmth Arya had been starving for appeared, not for Arya, but for someone who made him feel powerful. "Céline," he replied. They spoke in fast, intimate shorthand. Projects, headlines, investors, timing. Arya stood beside them like a vase, invisible, but expensive enough to keep around. When Céline's gaze finally slid toward Arya, it wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. "Mrs. Blackthorne," Céline said, voice smooth. "So nice to finally meet you." Arya offered her hand. Céline shook it briefly, fingertips cold. Then Céline turned back to Damien, as if Arya had ceased to exist the moment her title was acknowledged. Later, on the drive home, Arya stared out the tinted window at the city lights blurring into streaks. "Céline's close to you," she said carefully. Damien didn't look at her. Then his phone glowed in his hand like a second face. "She's competent," he said. "She understands my world." A pause. "And you don't." Arya's throat tightened. "I'm trying." Damien sighed like a man burdened by a naive child. "Try harder," he said, "and wear the gray tomorrow. The press might be there." Arya's fingers curled into her lap. The seatbelt pressed against her chest like a warning. Outside, the city kept shining for everyone else. Inside, Arya felt herself dim. Arya didn't become invisible overnight. She learned invisibility, the way people learn to hold their breath. Slowly, out of necessity. The first winter of her marriage, she stopped speaking at events, not because she had nothing to say, but because every time she opened her mouth, Damien found a way to make her regret it. A glance that meant stop. A hand on her back that meant you're embarrassing me. A later lecture in the car that meant you are replaceable. So Arya smiled. She nodded. She became the perfect background. And at night, when Damien slept beside her with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world, Arya would slip out of bed, bare feet against cold stone floors. She would enter the small room she'd claimed as an office, a label Damien found amusing because he couldn't imagine Arya having work that mattered. In that room, the air smelled different. Not disinfectant, not cedar, fabric, thread, ink. Arya would turn on a single lamp, a circle of warm light in the sterile house, and she would open a drawer Damien didn't know existed. Inside, sketches. Hundreds of them. Clean lines, bold cuts, unapologetic silhouettes, and a name, E.V. No one knew who E.V. was. The fashion editors in Paris speculated in glossy columns. Buyers in Milan whispered at shows. Designers argued about whether E.V. was a collective, a ghost team, an old legend returned. Because E.V. didn't just design clothes, E.V. designed presence. A dress that made a woman look like she'd stopped asking permission. A coat that made a man look like he didn't need to shout to own a room. Evie could take fabric and turn it into a weapon, and Arya Wynn, Mrs. Damien Blackthorne, was Evie. She had started long before Damien, back when she was just Arya Wynn, sleeping in a tiny studio apartment with a sewing machine that rattled the neighbors' walls. Back when she survived on instant noodles and ambition. Back when she promised herself that if she ever made it, she would never let anyone shrink her again. Then she met Damien, and he had arrived at a charity auction like a myth. Tall, composed, expensive in every detail. He spoke about innovation like it was morality. He looked at Arya with a kind of focused interest that felt like recognition. "You don't belong in the corner," he said to her, offering a glass of champagne. Arya had laughed, nervously. "Maybe I do." Damien's eyes narrowed with something like amusement. "No," he said. "You're wasting yourself." That sentence had been honey. It had also been a hook. By the time Arya realized Damien didn't want to lift her up, he wanted to place her where he could always find her, it was already too late. So she hid. She kept Evie alive in secret, consulted via encrypted emails, late-night video calls, with a face blurred, voice altered, packages shipped discreetly, contracts signed by attorneys who never met her. It was exhausting, but it was also the only place Arya still existed fully. Some nights, she would stand in front of her sketchboard and press her palm against the paper. Her fingers would tremble, not from fear, but from rage she had nowhere to put. She would think of Damien's rules. The gray, the bun, the silence. Then she would draw something that defied all of it. A neckline that revealed a throat, like a challenge. A fabric that drank light instead of reflecting it politely. A shade of blue so deep it looked like the moment right before dawn admits it lost. Midnight velvet. Arya didn't know yet that she was drawing her escape. She only knew that she was drawing herself back into the world. And then, the invitation arrived. A heavy envelope. Cream paper, an embossed crest, Kingsley Crest Gala, hosted by Harlan Kingsley. And Damien saw it first, of course. His smile was immediate, eager, almost boyish in the way powerful men become when even bigger power beckons. "Harlan Kingsley," Damien said, reading the name like prayer. Finally. Arya stayed quiet. Damien's eyes cut to her. "You'll come with me?" Arya nodded automatically, already hearing the next instruction. Damien didn't disappoint. "And you'll wear the gray silk dress," he said. "The simple one. No distractions." Arya felt something shift inside her. Not a scream. A click. Like a lock turning. "Yes," she said softly. Damien, satisfied, returned to his phone. He didn't see Arya's hand slide into her pocket and touch the tiny fabric swatch she'd kept there for months. Midnight velvet. On the night of the gala, Blackthorne House moved like a machine preparing a product for display. A stylist Damien had hired, someone with a polite smile and tired eyes, waited in Arya's dressing room with the gray dress on a hanger. The dress was expensive. It was also empty. Arya stood in her robe, hair loose over her shoulders, watching the dress sway slightly, as if it were already bored. The stylist cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackthorne said this one," she murmured. Arya's reflection looked back at her, a woman in her late 20s, face too calm, eyes too awake, a woman who had spent 3 years shrinking to fit into someone else's narrative. Arya smiled at the stylist, gentle. "Thank you." The stylist relaxed, grateful to not be involved in conflict. Arya waited until the stylist stepped out to fetch pins. And then Arya opened the hidden compartment beneath her vanity and pulled out a garment bag she had sewn herself, a bag with no label, no logo, no evidence. Inside, wrapped in tissue like a secret, lay the gown. Midnight velvet, her own design, her own rebellion. Arya's fingers shook as she touched it. Not with fear, with the thrill of risk. She changed quickly, movements precise. The velvet slid over her skin like water turning into night. It fit her as if it had been waiting for her body to return. Then, she let her hair down. Not messy, not childish. A soft fall of waves brushed into controlled freedom. She added one piece of jewelry, a small pendant, silver, shaped like a V, not for Vance, for Vale, for the identity Damien had never truly erased, only buried. When the stylist returned, she froze in the doorway. "Oh my," Arya held up a finger, smiling. "Please," the stylist swallowed. "Mr. Blackthorn will—" "I know," Arya said. "Thank you for your help tonight." The stylist looked torn between job and conscience. Then she exhaled and nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Good luck," she whispered. Arya didn't need luck. She needed air. Downstairs, Damien waited by the front door, already in his tuxedo, already impatient. Celine Laurent stood beside him. Not in the car, not outside. In Damien's house. Arya's heartbeat slowed. Celine wore a silver gown, sharp, gleaming, designed to catch cameras. Her lipstick matched the color of fresh attention. She smiled when she saw Arya, but it wasn't warmth. It was surprise, and then calculation. Damien turned. His gaze swept Arya's body, and for half a second, he didn't seem to recognize her. And then the recognition hit, and his face hardened like stone. "What is that?" he said. Arya kept her voice steady. "A dress." Damien's nostrils flared. "I told you to wear gray." Arya tilted her head. "This is dark enough," she said calmly. Celine let out a small laugh, as if Arya were being amusingly disobedient. Damien's eyes flashed. "Go change." Arya stepped forward. The velvet moved with her, swallowing the house's sterile light. "No," she said. The word landed in the marble foyer like a dropped glass. Damien stared at her, stunned by the sound of refusal. "You're embarrassing me," he hissed, leaning closer. His voice dropped. "You think Kingsley cares about your little performance? He'll see you and think you're trying too hard." Arya met Damien's eyes. "Or maybe," she said softly, "he'll finally see me." Damien's jaw tightened, and Celine watched, smile faint, like someone enjoying a private show. Damien straightened abruptly as if deciding he could punish her later. "Fine," he snapped, "but don't speak unless I tell you. Don't draw attention. Don't—" Arya didn't answer. She walked past him toward the car. Damien followed, anger riding shotgun. And as they drove, the city lights reflected in the velvet like stars trapped in fabric. Kingsley Crest wasn't a building. It was a statement. A historic estate turned event space, perched above the city like old money watching new money scramble. Inside, the air smelled of white flowers and expensive wine. Strings played something classical, softened into background luxury. People glittered. Diamonds. Laughter, power. Arya stepped through the entrance and felt every gaze turn, not because she wanted them to, but because the velvet insisted. Damien walked beside her stiffly, hand hovering at her back like he was guiding a hazard. Celine stayed close to Damien, too close, murmuring into his ear as if they were a unit. Arya's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. She had survived being invisible. Being seen wouldn't kill her. At the far end of the room, a circle of people parted like a curtain. Harlan Kingsley stood at the center, older than Damien but somehow sharper. His hair was silver, his posture relaxed in the way only true power could afford. He didn't smile much. When he did, it looked like he'd decided the person in front of him was worth the effort. Damien straightened, smoothing his jacket. He transformed instantly into the version of himself built for investors. Charming, confident, polished. He approached Kingsley with a handshake ready. "Harlan," Damien said warmly. "It's an honor." Kingsley's gaze slid over Damien, then past him, and landed on Arya. For a moment, Kingsley said nothing. His eyes traveled slowly, carefully, over the gown, the cut, the fabric, the way the velvet sat like authority on Arya's body. Arya felt something electric, like recognition. Kingsley's eyebrows rose slightly, then he smiled. It wasn't big, but it was real. "Well," Kingsley said, voice low, amused. "That's interesting." Damien's smile faltered. Thank you. My wife—" Kingsley held up a hand, cutting Damien off without even looking at him. His gaze remained on Arya. "You," he said. "What's your name?" Damien's eyes flashed, offended. "She's Arya Blackthorn." Arya answered anyway, soft but clear. "Arya Wynn." Damien turned sharply. "Issaria—" Kingsley's head tilted. "Wynn," he repeated as if tasting the sound. "Not Blackthorn." Arya didn't explain. Kingsley didn't ask. Instead, he stepped to the side and gestured toward the table nearest the head of the room, an obvious position of honor. "Come," Kingsley said to Arya. "Sit with us." Damien's face went tight. "Harlan," Damien said quickly, laughing too loudly. "She's not used to these conversations. She's—" Kingsley's gaze finally flicked to Damien. It was the look of a man swatting away a buzzing fly. "I wasn't inviting you," Kingsley said pleasantly. The people around them laughed, uncertain, then relieved when Kingsley didn't retract it. Damien's cheeks colored. Celine's smile froze in place. A perfectly painted mask. Arya took one step toward the table. Damien grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to cause bruises, but hard enough to send a message. Arya looked down at his hand, then up at his face. In front of Kingsley. In front of everyone. Slowly, she slid her wrist free. Damien's fingers fell away as if they'd lost permission. Arya walked to the seat Kingsley indicated and sat. The chair felt like a throne compared to the corners Damien had assigned her. Kingsley took the seat beside her. Damien and Celine were left standing for half a second too long, then forced to take places farther down the table. Arya could feel Damien's anger radiating from across the linen. Kingsley leaned slightly toward Arya. "You have good taste," he said. Arya smiled faintly. "It wasn't purchased." Kingsley's eyes sharpened. "No," he murmured, awoke. It wasn't." Dinner began. Conversation flowed like money. Effortless, ruthless. Supply chains, global markets, upcoming acquisitions. Damien tried to dominate the talk, pushing his ether grid project, dropping numbers, painting visions. Kingsley listened politely, but his attention drifted back to Arya again and again, as if the velvet had left a fingerprint on his mind. At some point, Kingsley asked, "Arya, what do you do?" Damien laughed quickly. She keeps herself busy. Charities mostly." Arya's fork paused mid-air. Charities. The word Damien used whenever he wanted to reduce her into something harmless. Arya set her fork down gently. "I design," she said. Damien's eyes narrowed. Kingsley's gaze locked onto her. "Design what?" Arya's pulse beat once, heavy. "Fashion," she said. Celine let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, that's adorable." Arya didn't look at Celine. She looked at Kingsley. "It's also economics," Arya added. If you're serious about it." Kingsley's mouth curved. "Go on." Arya felt the table's attention tilt toward her like a spotlight. She could have shrunk. She could have apologized. Instead, she spoke. About textile sourcing and risk. about how one disrupted shipping route could collapse an entire season, about why sustainability was expensive not because it was trendy, but because it required rebuilding supply chains instead of exploiting them. She talked about pricing structures, labor, margins. She didn't sound like someone playing at knowledge. She sounded like someone who had lived inside it. Kingsley listened, eyes brightening with each sentence. Damien stared at Arya as if she'd grown a second head. When Arya finally paused, Kingsley chuckled softly. "Well," he said, "you're not the decoration Damien brought tonight." Damien's voice went cold. "Harlan, with respect..." Kingsley lifted a hand again, and then he did something that shifted the room's gravity. He turned to the table, investors, editors, CEOs, and he raised his glass. "I'd like to make a small acknowledgement," Kingsley said. Arya's stomach tightened. Damien stiffened. Celine's smile sharpened, ready for attention. Kingsley's gaze stayed on Arya. "Some of you," he continued, "have spent the last 2 years asking me the same question. Who is Ifi?" A ripple moved through the table. Heads lifted, eyes widened. Arya's heart slowed. Damien blinked, confused, then tense. Kingsley smiled. "I recognized the signature the moment she walked in," he said. Celine frowned. Damien's face drained of color. Kingsley's voice was calm, but it carried. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Evie, Eden Vale, has been sitting here listening to you underestimate her all evening." Silence slammed down. Arya could hear the faint click of a fork against a plate in the distance. Damien's mouth opened. "No," he whispered. Kingsley turned his head slightly toward Damien, expression amused. "Yes," he said. "And if you didn't know, Damien, that tells me more than any pitch deck ever could." Arya sat very still. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply let the truth fill the space Damien had kept empty. Damien's voice rose, strained. "This is ridiculous. My wife is..." Arya stood. Not dramatically, just enough. She looked at Damien with a calm that felt like winter. "I'm not your wife," she said. Damien froze. The table held its breath. Arya's voice stayed steady, each word placed carefully. "I'm filing for divorce tonight." Celine's gasp was small but real. Damien's face twisted, fury and panic colliding. "You can't," he snapped. "You think you can walk out and take everything? You think you're leaving with your little brand?" Arya reached into the small clutch she carried. Not for lipstick. Not for a phone. For an envelope. She slid it across the table toward Damien. Damien stared at it suspiciously. Arya's eyes didn't flicker. "That's my prenup addendum," she said. "And the incorporation documents for Eden Vale." Damien's hand hovered, then snatched the envelope. He opened it. As he read, his face shifted. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked a lot like fear. Arya's voice was soft, almost kind. "I built Eden Vale before I met you," she said. "It was mine then. It's mine now. And you have no claim to it." Damien's throat worked as if swallowing glass. He looked up. "You're lying!" he hissed. Arya tilted her head. "I'm documented." Kingsley leaned back, watching like a man witnessing a deserved storm. Damien's face contorted. "You think this is over?" he spat. "I can bury you. I can ruin you. You don't know what I'm capable of." Arya looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke the sentence that ended the old version of her. "I do," she said, and she turned away from him. Right there, at Kingsley's table, in front of everyone. She walked out of the gala without asking permission. The velvet moved like a closing curtain. Behind her, Damien's empire began to crack. Not with explosions, but with whispers. And whispers were how powerful men drowned. Arya didn't go back to Blackthorn House that night. She went to a hotel suite Kingsley arranged without asking questions, because Kingsley didn't offer help like charity. He offered it like investment. In the suite's quiet, Arya stood in front of the window overlooking the city and felt her body finally register what she'd done. Her hands shook. Her breath came too fast, not because she missed Damien, because she'd stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. Her phone buzzed. Damien. Once, twice, 10 times. Then texts. Come home. Now. You're making a fool of yourself. Celine says you're having some kind of episode. I'll fix this if you stop. Don't do this to me. Arya stared at the last message. Don't do this to me. 3 years. And even now, Damien could only see himself. Arya turned her phone off. In the morning, the war started. Damien's lawyers moved fast, aggressive, expensive, designed to intimidate. Headlines appeared, mysteriously sourced, painting Arya as unstable, ungrateful, opportunistic. A friend of the couple told a columnist that Arya had become obsessed with fame. Another anonymous source suggested Arya had fabricated her identity as Eden Vale to extort Damien. Selene Laurent began appearing on camera beside Damien like a shield. She spoke softly about mental health and concern. She wore sympathy like perfume. Damien himself went on a business network show and smiled that polished, controlled smile. I love my wife, he said into the camera, and I'm worried about her. She's confused right now. Arya watched the clip once. She didn't throw anything. She didn't cry. She simply reached into the drawer of her hotel desk and took out a folder. Thick, organized, prepared. Because Arya hadn't survived Damien by being impulsive. She had survived by planning. Inside the folder were documents proving Eden Vale's existence long before Damien, contracts, timestamps, financial trails. But there was another section, too, one Arya had been building quietly, carefully for months. Ethergrid, Damien's crown jewel project, the one he pitched as the future of clean energy and data management, the one investors loved, the one he needed Kingsley to fund. Arya had heard Damien's late-night calls through walls. She had seen numbers on his laptop when he thought she wasn't looking. She had heard phrases like adjusted metrics and we'll smooth it later. She hadn't understood all of it at first. So she did what she always did when faced with something dangerous. She learned. Arya read. She researched. As she spoke, under the guise of charity work, to engineers, compliance consultants, people who had been pushed out of Damien's company quietly. And what she found wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Safety tests rushed, data altered, reports reformatted, investors fed a fantasy. Arya's stomach turned each time she uncovered another piece, not because she wanted Damien destroyed, but because she remembered the way he stood on stages talking about responsibility. While behind the scenes, he treated truth like something he could dress in gray and hide. One afternoon, Arya met with an attorney recommended by Kingsley, a woman named Noelle Hart, sharp-eyed, calm, impossible to intimidate. Noelle listened without interruption as Arya laid out the folder. When Arya finished, Noelle exhaled slowly. You understand what this means? Noelle said. Arya nodded. It means he lied. Noelle's gaze held hers. It means if you report this, it becomes bigger than divorce. Arya's fingers tightened around her mug of tea. I know. Noelle leaned forward. He will come for you. Arya's mouth tilted faintly, humorless. He already is. Noelle studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then we do this carefully, Noelle said. By the book. Arya's voice was steady. I don't want revenge, she said. And it was true. At least it was not the whole truth. She wanted something deeper. She wanted reality to win. "I want him to stop getting away with it," Arya continued. Noelle's eyes softened just slightly. "Then we file," she said. And so, Arya did. Not publicly, not theatrically. A quiet submission. A whistleblower report placed into the system like a seed. Arya knew what seeds did. They waited. And then, at the right moment, they cracked concrete. Months passed like tightrope steps. Arya rebuilt her public self piece by piece, carefully, intentionally. She didn't rush into interviews. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't play the victim, even though she had been one. Instead, she let Eden Vale speak. A private showing in Paris. A capsule collection in Milan that sold out in hours. Editors wrote about Eve Fi like a legend returned with teeth. And then Arya announced something bigger. A runway show in the city. A statement. A reveal. Harbor Line Yard Pavilion. It wasn't just a venue. It was a converted industrial space. Near the water. Raw brick. Steel beams. History of labor and grit. Everything Blackthorn House was not. The night of the show, the air vibrated. Press lined up outside as if waiting for a trial. Inside, the runway stretched like a blade through the room. The music pulsed. Lights moved like breath. Arya stood backstage in silence, surrounded by models and fabric and the scent of hairspray and heat. A young assistant, bright-eyed, nervous, held a clipboard with shaking hands. "Ms. Wynne," the assistant whispered. "They're all here." Arya didn't ask who they meant. She knew. Damien would come. Not because he cared about fashion, because he could not stand being excluded from any narrative that touched his name. For weeks, Damien's lawyers had tried to block Arya from using Eden Vale publicly, claiming some absurd marital stake. They failed. Damien's PR machine tried to smear the show as a vanity revenge event. The tickets still sold out. Damien's ego, wounded, hungry, could not tolerate it. So Arya planned, not to harm him, not physically, not with tricks, with truth. Because truth presented at the right time could be a trap. Noelle Hart had been in contact, quietly, with investigators. Arya didn't know every detail, and she didn't need to. She only needed to create a moment where Damien's worst impulses would make him visible. A public arena. Cameras. A reason for him to lose control. Arya had one more thing. A message sent to Damien through channels he couldn't ignore. A rumor, planted carefully, that the show would include a piece inspired by Blackthorn, an exposé, a humiliation. It wasn't true, but it was believable enough to bait him. Because Damien always assumed the world revolved around him. Backstage, Arya closed her eyes and listened to the crowd's muffled roar, and a hand touched her shoulder. Kingsley. Harlan Kingsley stood beside her, elegant even in the chaos. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. Arya opened her eyes. "I've never been more sure," she said. Kingsley studied her face. Then he nodded once. Approval, respect, perhaps even pride. "Then walk," he said. The show began. Look after look. Midnight tones, sharp tailoring, fabric like armor. The crowd responded the way crowds did when they witnessed something honest. They leaned in. When Arya stepped onto the runway, at the end, wearing the midnight velvet again, the room erupted. Cameras flashed. She walked to the center of the catwalk and stopped. Silence fell gradually like snow. Arya lifted her microphone. Her voice was calm. Eden Vale was born in a room no one saw, she said, because I didn't have permission to exist yet. A murmur. Arya continued. But tonight I'm not asking for permission. Applause. Arya breathed in. This is what visibility looks like, she said. And then, movement. Shouts. A commotion near the side entrance. Security converged. The crowd turned, hungry. A figure pushed through Damien. He looked wilder than he ever had on camera. Tie loosened, eyes bright with fury, face flushed. He stormed toward the runway like it was his property. Arya didn't move. She watched him approach as if watching a storm arrive exactly on schedule. Damien reached the edge of the catwalk and yelled, voice raw. "This is a lie!" he shouted, pointing at Arya. "She's a fraud! She stole that identity, she—" Cameras swiveled. The room held its breath. Arya lifted her mic again, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Damien climbed onto the runway. The wrongness of it was immediate, like a man walking into a temple with muddy shoes. He stalked toward Arya, rage making him careless. "You think you can ruin me?" he hissed, close enough now that the front rows could hear. "You think you can take what's mine?" Arya's eyes held his. "I never took what was yours," she said evenly. "I took back what was mine." Damien laughed, high, frantic. "You were nothing without me." And then 2 men stepped onto the runway, plain clothes, badges. FBI. The crowd gasped. Damien froze mid-breath. Arya didn't flinch. The agent spoke, calm, practiced. "Damien Elias Blackthorne," he said, "you are under arrest for securities fraud and related charges." Damien's face contorted. This is her!" he shouted. "She's manipulating you, The agent took Damien's arm. Damien twisted, trying to pull away. Suddenly desperate, suddenly small. "No!" he snapped, voice cracking. "No! You can't! Do you know who I am?" The agent didn't raise his voice. He simply brought Damien's wrists behind his back. Cuffs clicked shut. Metal. Final. The crowd erupted, shocked, exhilarated, horrified. Phones lifted like offerings. Damien turned his head, eyes wild, searching for an ally in the sea of faces. He found none. He looked at Arya again, and in that look for the first time, he seemed to truly see her. Not as property, not as background, not as an object he could mute, as an opponent, as a person, as the consequence of his own cruelty. Arya stepped closer, just enough for him to hear her over the chaos. Her voice was soft. "Wear your gray," she whispered. Damien blinked, confused, rage shaking. Arya's gaze was steady, merciless in its honesty. It suits you," she said. The agents led Damien off the runway. He stumbled once. Not because they were rough, because his own legs forgot how to carry a man who no longer had control. As he disappeared, the room held a strange silence, like an audience realizing they had witnessed something that couldn't be replayed like entertainment. Arya turned back to the crowd. Her hands didn't shake now. Her voice didn't break. "This show," she said, "was never about him." She paused. "It was about the moment a ghost becomes a woman again." The audience erupted in applause. But Arya didn't hear it as praise. She heard it as proof of life. 6 months later, the city's skyline looked the same. But the story behind one of its tallest towers had changed. Blackthorn Dynamics had collapsed in slow motion. Stock plunges, board resignations, odd investigations, deals evaporating like mist. The empire Damien had built on curated narratives and manipulated numbers couldn't survive daylight. And then, quietly, efficiently, a new entity began buying up its pieces. Not hostile, not chaotic, methodical, like someone collecting fragments of a weapon and forging it into something else. In a private conference room, Arya sat at the head of a long table, wearing a suit the color of deep ink. No gray, no apology. Across from her, attorneys reviewed final papers. Kingsley stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city as if he were watching an old chessboard. Noelle Hart placed a document in front of Arya. "One signature," Noelle said. Arya looked down at the page. It wasn't just a purchase. It was a takeover. She could almost hear Damien's voice. "You don't understand my world." And Arya picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed. Noelle exhaled, satisfied. "Congratulations," she said. "It's done." Kingsley turned, smile faint. Arya leaned back in her chair and let herself feel it for 1 second. Not triumph, not gloating, relief. A door closing, a different life opening. Within weeks, the press had new headlines. Not about Damien's downfall anymore, about Arya's rise, because she didn't just acquire Blackthorn's assets. She renamed them, rebranded them, refused to let his name continue haunting the skyline. Win Global, a name that belonged to her. On the day the new sign was unveiled, Arya stood on a stage outside the tower. Cameras flashed. The city wind tugged gently at her hair. She wore a dress. Simple, powerful. Midnight blue. Not velvet this time, but the color remained. A motif. A promise. When a reporter asked, "Miss Wynne, do you feel vindicated?" Arya paused. She could have said yes. She could have smiled and given them the soundbite they wanted. Instead, she answered with something more honest. "I feel visible," she said, and then she stepped away from the microphones. Because visibility was no longer something she owed the public. It was something she owned for herself. Damien Blackthorne's sentence came quietly, without theatricality. 15 years. The headlines screamed it anyway. But Arya didn't read them. She didn't need to. One cold afternoon, Noelle texted her a simple update. Sentencing finalized. Transfer complete. Arya stared at the message for a moment. Then she put her phone down. She walked to her closet. The closet was huge now, more space than she once dared imagine. Color lived there, deep reds, and bright whites, sleek blacks, iridescent fabrics that caught light like laughter. In one corner, she kept a single gray dress, not because she missed it, because it reminded her of how far she'd walked. Arya touched the fabric lightly. Then she closed the closet door and turned away. Somewhere, in a prison far from the glamour Damien once worshipped, he pulled on a uniform. Gray, the same shade he had used as a weapon. Now it was his reflection. His punishment wasn't just the bars. It was the fact that he had become the thing he tried to create in Arya. A nobody in a system that didn't care how loudly he once spoke. And if Damien ever thought about Arya at night, about the way she stood in velvet while the cuffs closed around his wrists, he would understand the part that hurt the most. She hadn't destroyed him with chaos, and she had destroyed him with clarity. She had simply stopped being invisible. Months later, Arya hosted a small private dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. Not a gala, not a spectacle, just a table with warm light and honest conversation. Kingsley attended, of course, still amused by how fate liked dramatic symmetry. Noelle came too, finally letting herself laugh without scanning the room for threats. And Arya invited one more guest, the stylist from Blackthorn House, the woman who had whispered good luck that night. When the stylist arrived, she looked stunned to be included, like someone used to serving stories, not being part of them. Arya stood to greet her. "Thank you," Arya said simply. The stylist blinked. "For what?" Arya smiled, small and real. "For not trying to stop me," she said. How for letting me walk out wearing who I was. The stylist's eyes filled. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Arya squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to be brave all at once, Arya said. Sometimes you just have to not help the cage. That night, after everyone left, Arya walked alone along the river. The city lights shimmered in the water. She breathed in. The air tasted like winter and possibility. For the first time in years, Arya felt like her body belonged to her. Her face belonged to her. Her name belonged to her. She wasn't Eden Vale as a mask. She was Eden Vale as a truth. And she wasn't Arya Wynn as a ghost. She was Arya Wynn as a woman, standing in her own life, finally unafraid to be seen. That if this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to fit someone else's idea of you, leave a comment with just one word. Visible. Not for me. For you. Because sometimes the first step out of a cage is simply admitting you were in one.